The Novelist, a novella by L. Barkat, from D.S. Poetry Press. Chapter 9. It was a light rain, and Laura decided to step into it. She put the red sneakers on, first the left and then the right, lacing each one tightly, as if trying to contain herself. Geoffrey disliked rain, said he had a cat instinct, a kind of retracting impulse when the droplets touched his face. Laura had observed this on the night they met, and it made her laugh. "Afraid you'll melt?" she'd asked. And he'd remarked about the cat instinct and offered her his shelter under a large black umbrella. She took cover, leaning in close as they walked to the Princeton Club where Geoffrey was staying. Would she like some tea, he'd asked, after the poetry lecture? The Princeton would have it, and they could sit in the library and continue talking poetry if she liked. She liked. And so they walked beneath the black umbrella until they reached the great brassy double doors of the club and stepped into the dry air. "Mr. Bloom?" A concierge nodded as they entered, and Geoffrey had returned the greeting with a "good evening." As it turned out, she and Geoffrey never got the tea, nor did they sit in the staid old library. She was carrying a large leather bag, already overstuffed, and had filled it further by purchasing a few books at the lecture, including a 2-inch thick anthology of Chinese poetry, for which Geoffrey had served as editor, and a volume of The Tale of Genji. "Looks like a heavy bag," he'd said, and offered to stash it in his room upstairs while they went searching for tea. He had said it casually, as if he'd said it 100 times before and no longer needed practice. Laura noticed this, as if without noticing. Then she understood the offer for what it was, and realized she might, after all, miss out on tea in favor of intimate company. She took the chance. "Ah, Murasaki," he had whispered and kissed her bare shoulders, after removing her black wool suit to reveal a plum-colored camisole. Then he'd undone her, strap by strap, layer by layer, until he had come to her breasts and taken them one after the other into his smooth hands, then onto his tongue. It had been forever, she thought, since someone had made her feel so beautiful. The closeness overcame her. When she returned home on the train late that night, she had sent him a poem to remember the moment. The Tale of Genji, abridged by Murasaki, was not her real name. Did you know that Murasaki means purple? When they bound up Genji's boyish hair, the cord they used was... Did you know, how could you, that the first time a reader chose to insult my work, she called it, "Purple is the color of closeness." The cord was... Murasaki is her real name. Murasaki had been born in 973 to a minor branch of an otherwise powerful family. Her name had gone unrecorded, being that she was only a daughter. But the nickname Murasaki had survived, along with what was now recognized as a major masterpiece of fiction, ranking as high in Japan as the Homeric epics, Shakespeare's works, and Proust's Remembrance of Things Past. Murasaki had probably come to serve the Empress, Akiko, because of her talent for writing fiction. That was the theory. Geoffrey had explained a good deal of this in his lecture, remarking on the irony that though fiction was below the dignity of Japanese men of the time, it was men who ultimately championed the complex work, which also contained, more to their liking, 795 poems. Poetry being considered the noblest of arts, it was perhaps also ironic that the best poet in the tale was the Akashi lady. But Perhaps this was not irony after all, Laura had thought later, considering that Murasaki may have purposely, rebelliously, put the best poetic words in Akashi's mouth, the mouth of a woman. If Murasaki could write a work of fiction in an environment that didn't respect it, why couldn't Laura set down at least one paragraph to entertain a friend who was asking her for a story? It was a good question. But so far, she didn't have a good answer as to why she could only eke out the end. Laura stepped out from under the wainscot ceiling and let the rain play against her upturned hands. She wondered idly if Megan liked rain, and thought to perhaps tweet the question if she could find a way to do it that didn't seem too oddly personal. But she was also nervous that if she tweeted again anytime soon, Megan might bring up the novel. Perhaps it was best to make herself scarce for a while. What if she just happened to get lost outside, walking around in the rain or camping out under the big old pine tree at the back of the yard? Maybe no one would notice her absence, least of all Megan, with her crazy dreams.